Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. Let's turn to the 25th Amendment. Section 4 provides a constitutional way for the vice president and a majority of the cabinet to declare that a president is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office, at which point the vice president assumes the powers of acting president. And there's been some talk that perhaps Biden's condition is or could become bad enough that it would require an invocation of the 25th Amendment. Let's listen to Speaker Mike Johnson make that case.
In good conscience, if I was in the Biden cabinet, I would be wrestling with that question because I would know what we all know now, that Joe Biden is not up to the task. And it's a dangerous situation for the reasons we articulated earlier. So there's a time to every purpose under heaven. Desperate times call for desperate measures. I think the 25th Amendment is appropriate here. Now, we know, and Chip knows, we all know that the House doesn't have the authority to do that. It's the vice president of the United States that has to initiate that process. We don't have any involvement unless there's a disagreement between the president and what the vice president and the cabinet decide. So we're far away from that eventuality. But I think the notion that the 25th Amendment would be appropriate here is something that most Republicans and, frankly, most Americans would agree with.
Monet, what do you make of this 25th Amendment talk?
Well, I think that Mike Johnson is exactly right to say that Joe Biden is no longer fit for duty and to suggest that it would be in the interest of the country for him to resign, given the current state of his mental faculties and his decline. The country would be better off with someone who is able to respond in a quick and sharp way to all of the crises that the country is possible to face. But I don't think that the 25th Amendment is a realistic solution to the problem of Joe Biden continuing to hold that office, really just because there's no way to sustain it politically. I think that a provision requires a two-thirds majority of both houses of Congress if Joe Biden were to object. Obviously, that even takes for granted that you could get the vice president and a majority of the cabinet to agree to invoke it, which would be a very high bar. These people are mostly hired by Joe Biden and are loyal to him. But assuming you did, you'd have to have two-thirds of both houses of the Congress to affirm it if Joe Biden decided to challenge it. And there's no way that you could build a majority that big to sustain it. I think it's telling that the 25th Amendment being sustained requires a larger majority even than impeachment, because it seems that the 25th Amendment was meant to be invoked in circumstances that are even more remote than impeachable offenses. I believe it was conceived during the 1960s after the Kennedy assassination, as people were considering the possibility that Kennedy might have narrowly lived and been in a coma, and they wanted to create a provision to temporarily relieve the president of his powers if he were truly deeply unable to dispense them. So this isn't the kind of case that the 25th Amendment was designed to create, and it's not really possible politically that you would be able to sustain removing Joe Biden from his powers with the current political makeup of Washington.
Kim, that's my takeaway too, is that the 25th Amendment was not built for a situation like this because the framers of the amendment in the 1960s, after the JFK assassination, as Monet lays out, they were not trying to create a system to contest presidential power where a president is sitting in the White House saying, no, I'm fine, I'm not disqualified from office. And so the bar to sustain a disqualification of the president as unfit to serve is higher than the bar to impeach and convict and remove the president, because an impeachment can go through the House with a simple majority and then it's two-thirds to convict. And sustaining a removal of a president under the 25th Amendment requires two-thirds of both houses. So if Joe Biden objected, as Monet describes, he would only need 34 senators to side with him in order to win the power struggle. And I'm not sure that's where we are. You can imagine a situation, a president with dementia, perhaps Joe Biden reelected and now turning 84 or 85, where things have gotten so bad that a majority of Democratic cabinet and a vice president could say, we really need to do this and we need to sustain that objection. But I just don't think that that is where we are right now. And if President Biden has 6 months left in office until the next inauguration on January 20th, I grant that there's some risk of an adversary trying to take advantage of his age by launching some kind of attack at 3 a.m. in the United States in Washington. But there's also a risk of trying to invoke the 25th Amendment and creating a strange sort of power struggle, power vacuum, the kind of thing that we've never seen in Washington, because the 25th Amendment has never been invoked in this fashion.
Yeah, that's right. Historically, you have it absolutely correct. The writers of the 25th Amendment, they did not do this to come up with a new mechanism for contesting presidential power. This was obviously crafted in the aftermath of the JFK assassination, and it was meant to clarify this very murky situation about who was actually president when the actual president has become comatose, for instance, or otherwise truly incapable of rendering any duties. We've also had certain presidents that have asked for it to be invoked, for instance, when they've had surgeries and they were out of commission, as it were, for a while, so that there was an orderly transition and everyone understood who was in charge in case there was some sort of episode or moment. I mean, I guess what we have going on here is people debating the definition of incapacitated. I would argue, and I'm quite certain that any legal scholar would argue, that that is not the definition when this was written as it would apply to Joe Biden right now. As you said, it could get that way. But I'd also caution people to be careful what they wish for. I appreciate that Joe Biden is not on his game at the moment, and that's a serious discussion for this election. But I want everyone to consider, let's just say that somehow they successfully used the 25th Amendment, and we suddenly have acting President Kamala Harris engaged in the moment at the head of government, as, for instance, China decides at that moment to invade Taiwan. That does not make me feel overly comfortable. And that is before you get to those very legitimate questions, as you raise, Kyle, about whether or not we want to go down the road again of having another unprecedented new use of a power that leads to this constitutional power struggle and sets a new precedent.
Thank you, Kim and Monet. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back tomorrow with another edition of Potomac Watch.